This is the Welcome to Humanity podcast with thought leader and transformative psychiatrist, Dr. Fred Moss. This show focuses on the betterment of humanity on a global scale. Each episode will leave you enlightened, inspired, and ready to make an impact in your world. Welcome to the show. Welcome to your life. Welcome to humanity. Here's Dr. Fred.
Welcome to the Welcome to Humanity podcast. And today I am so honored and so pleased, and really in some ways I would say I'm blessed to be with my very good friend, a man I've known for, I'd say we're getting on the better part of 10 years, who has a story to tell. And who he is and who he gets to be these days is someone who's making a large difference in the world. And what has happened over time is that Peter is now known, called on and known and, in demand for the difference that he's making. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce to you, my listeners, my very good friend and colleague, Peter Fiekowsky. Peter, thank you so much for being on the call with us today. It's really great to have you.
Fred, you're welcome. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very much looking forward to going somewhere interesting this hour.
All right. Beautiful. Before we dive into today's conversation with my good friend, Peter Fiekowsky, I wanted to give you an update of what's going on with my book, The Creative 8. So guess what? It's actually loaded up on Amazon, and all you have to do is go to Amazon.com and hit Welcome to Humanity Creative 8. And boom, it should pop right up. It's an opportunity to pick off either the print version or the ebook version. I want to give you a completely free copy of this audiobook because you've been a listener of this podcast. And the way to get it for free is to head on over to welcometohumanity.net/creative. This is a complimentary version. It's really my pleasure. So now let's get back to our awesome conversation with Peter Fiekowsky. Well, Peter, I'm going to just open up the door here. And I know, and you know, that if I ask you an open-ended question here, like, that leaves open all sorts of possible avenues to answer from, that you're likely to have a heyday with that. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to take the liberty to ask a very simple, open-ended question. And that question is, Peter, what are you up to? Who is this Peter guy that my listeners are listening to today?
Oh, that's easy. I've got it posted on my wall. It says, my purpose in life is to leave a world we are proud of to our children. Anything else you want to know?
Yes, I do. I think that's representative in some ways of all of us, and not so many people have it posted on their wall to remind them every day. So when you see that in the morning, when you see that when you're considering becoming disempowered for any given minute, what do you see when you look at that on the wall? What do you see about Peter Fiekowsky and what that purpose is?
Well, I'm going to answer a slightly different question, and that is, why that? And
okay.
that posting on the wall had an earlier iteration. I wrote it in a landmark seminar back around 2002, 2003. And what I love about this is, leaving a world to our children is, everyone wants that pretty much. And what worked great about a world that we're proud of is you can only get that out of your heart. Right? You can never logic your way into being proud.
That's beautiful.
And so I'm a physicist. And before I did that, I'm sure my mission was more quantitative or physical, healthy and happy, right? There are happiness indices where they quantify happiness. And when I ended up with a world that we're proud of, it was great because there was no argument. Mm-hmm. And it took me down a very interesting path over time. It's really been in the last 3 or 4 years or maybe 5, I did ask, I wonder what it is that has us be proud. Mm-hmm. Right? Because what makes me proud is very similar to what makes you proud.
Right.
And no one's going to argue that. Yeah, there'll be some differences, but once we agree on that, then we say, well, it must have something to do with culture and probably a lot to do with our DNA. And it's really hard to quantify culture, and it changes all the time anyway. So what can we learn from our DNA about being proud?
That's really great. Yeah, it's great. So, I get the connection between proud as a function of pride, I guess. So proud and on one's heart, and that there's something different that has that be difficult to quantify, as it's not in the classical time or timeline of how to measure amounts of pride, or what actually makes us proud, and what is it that, and it seems like we're hardwired, and maybe it is in our DNA.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
So there's something about being proud. It has to do with delight, right? If someone delights you, you might well say that, depending on your relationship to them, you might, if you're close related, if they delight you, you'll likely say they made you proud. And where I went with this, making a long story slightly shorter, is looking at, well, let me hold that aside for a second. I ran into the same question about the same time, around 2003, in our work on poverty reduction. We had, in this organization, Results, I've been a volunteer in for 3 decades, maybe 4. And we'd make great progress immunizing the world's children, reducing child mortality and health, and microfinance, and turning around the AIDS epidemic. Huge impact. And it became clear to me that we could do anything we wanted. So rather than whittling around the edges, obviously reducing the child death rate isn't exactly whittling around the edges, but it's not the ultimate be-all of human happiness and satisfaction. It's big, but it's not the ultimate. And so I asked, what does it mean to end hunger and poverty? Because ending hunger, obviously, I just had lunch, and I've ended hunger in my vicinity for 4 hours or so, but that's clearly empty. It's like, fine, so what?
Right.
And and even reducing death rates, it's like, well, everybody dies, and so reducing death rates is a little bit of an empty offer. Obviously, there's something to it, but it's not in the literal words saving lives. And so, and I was perplexed about that. And then I worked on, and I'll just leave it on the table, like that was perplexing. What do we mean by ending hunger and poverty? So then I got involved in climate, because it was very clear. I had worked on climate for a little while, and I gave up when I talked to all the climate experts, and they said, we don't have any goal. We don't think anything's possible. So we're going to whittle around the edges, and we'll try to reduce emissions, and that'll slow down our extinction. So rather than being extinct by the end of the century, maybe we can continue on till 2150. And I thought that was sweet, but I wasn't. I left the game. I said, I'm not interested in that game. I've been having more fun in poverty reduction. So, but then after a while, by 2010, it was clear poverty reduction had hit the wall, because climate change was reducing harvests. It was reducing the natural health of our ecosystems, and people were getting more hungry. And that was never going to turn around as long as we until we turned around the climate. And so I wanted to know, what does it mean to turn around the climate? And so I gave that up. And then my daughter came home. I looked on the wall. Right. It says, my purpose in life is to leave a world we're proud of to our children. And I was very clear that a world that humans couldn't survive in, I would not be proud to give her.
Yeah, that seems like that wouldn't be that good of a gift for future generations at this point.
Yeah, exactly. No one's ever argued that. It's like, you don't. What I love about it is there's no argument. It's like, obviously, but then the question is, okay, so what is a climate I would be proud to give her? That story went through having dinner with a bishop at a UN climate meeting in Marrakech. And he convinced me that climate wasn't science. It was actually about humanity. And then the light went on. And I could see that the climate we want is the same climate that we evolved for. Like, that's sort of a no-brainer. Our body systems, our culture, the nature we like, they all evolved inside of a certain climate, a certain CO2 level and temperature ranges around the world. And anything different than that would be uncomfortable for us. It would be difficult.
Anything different than the climate that we evolved for would be uncomfortable, would be relatively uncomfortable. Yes?
Yeah. And so we had a goal. As I looked at that, I could see, this thing about what I'm proud of is actually wired into my DNA.
Interesting. We're back to that. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because my DNA evolved over hundreds of thousands of years. Our DNA evolved for a certain climate. So I said, that's interesting. Because what's great about DNA is it's not psychological. You don't have to read books about it and see what others' opinions are about it. You can just logically think through all sorts of things by doing this little exercise. I would say, Fred, you and I are at a drafting table, and we're designing the DNA for humans. And we know that this animal is not very strong and not very fast. And its superpower is it's social and fairly smart. And so, let's design the DNA. And the goal of the DNA, it only has one goal in life, is to survive to the next generation or next 2 generations. And with that little exercise, first thing, as I said, we can see that the climate we want is one that the DNA has already evolved for. Over time, the DNA can evolve for different climates. DNA always does that, but it does that over sort of glacial time, over geologic time. And
thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years, not like the next 8 years or something like that.
Exactly. But then a lot of other things come up. Like this thing about what I'm proud of is like whatever pride is. This is a certain kind of happiness. Well, you and I at the drafting table will design these human beings to be happy when they do things that have their future generations be healthy. Right? Because it's like the total no-brainer.
Total no-brainer. You're right.
The DNA, it can control our actions by making some things enjoyable and other things boring as hell. So eating sand is really boring. You do it once or twice when you're young, and then you say, never mind.
Right.
On the other hand, a good dinner with friends is endlessly delightful.
Right. Beautiful.
Yeah. And so we do it over and over again. And of course, having dinner with friends in a social species gives you bonding, gives you creativity. And then, they invite their friends for next time. So it gives you more friends, all these things which are really valuable for our survival as a species.
Well, that's just beautiful. Go ahead.
Yeah. That's the first part of what's really cool about a world that we're proud, giving a world that we're proud of to our children. Because, we're just designed for that.
Right. Let me back you up a little bit. So, Peter, anyone who's listening who's able to walk you through your brilliance and the cascade of your just straight out flat, no brainer intelligence that rides through. It's one of the things I love about Peter here is that it does come across as just like non-arguable, just no brainer truths spoken to by just another human that becomes brilliant in the focus that you put on. The idea that happiness marginally synonymous with pride, is created by leading and leaving a healthy environment so that we can propagate into the next generation or the next two generations. And it would be obvious if we are social and smart animals that the way to do that is to head the world in a direction that is consistent with how we evolved to develop, how we have evolved over time.
Yeah.
How am I hitting? Is that about right? About what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, the key thing is this: hold that on the table for a moment. That that we can point to things that just make us happy, and they're things that lead humanity to be healthy and happy. Now, there's another aspect which is really interesting. So our brains have evolved over billions of years, now obviously beyond human, just every animal, to defend themselves against threats. Mm-hmm. So you and I are at the drafting table and we're saying, okay, good, we want this DNA line to survive. And what are the main threats to that DNA line? Mm-hmm. Well, there's lions and tigers and bears. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a little bit boring. I'm not going to discuss it because obviously we have to defend ourselves against predators. But much more important and much more threatening are neighboring tribes, because any neighboring tribe from time to time is going to come over and say, more or less say, I want your territory. Mm-hmm. And so if we're not very good at defending our territory from neighboring tribes, then the tribe which is better at fighting neighboring tribes will take over.
Yeah.
And so our DNA is really well trained at attacking neighboring tribes. Now, obviously, much of the time we don't attack the neighboring tribes. Much of the time we're collaborating with them and going swimming with them and having sex with their whoever on that tribe is interesting to us.
Yeah.
But when there's an experience of threat, when there's a perceived threat, then we kill them. Mm-hmm. It's sort of that simple. Because if we didn't, then they would kill us. And so whoever kills better. And so, and then what happens is we make up a story. Now that we have cognitive minds and thinking, after we kill them, we have to make up a reason for why we killed them.
Right.
Because we have to explain to the other people in our tribe why they were bad and I killed them and we are good.
Right.
Right. And it could be the kind of food they eat, the kind of God they pray to. It could be the kind of clothes they wear, how they treat their children, and on and on. It could be anything.
Yes.
But what's interesting is our cognitive brains don't really realize this. That first we kill the other tribe, and then we explain it. It's just like, if you're walking down a path and you jump because you feel you experience a snake. First you jump, and then you think, was that a snake? Now the thing to remember is you didn't see something, think it was a snake, and then jump.
Right.
The way the brain works is the super fast neurons sense the snake, you jump, and then your thinking says, oh, there was a snake, or I thought there was a snake. Mm-hmm. And the way we attack our neighbors is the same way. But our cognitive brain thinks that the reason I was mean to that black person was because black people are untrustworthy. Mm-hmm. But actually what happened is you felt threatened for whatever reason. It makes no difference what the reason is. It's probably historical. And you attack them. And then you made up a reason.
Right. And we know indeed, we share that view that really the action comes first and then the reason for those actions, given the meaning of our actions, like we need to do that in order to justify to our peers why it was we did something that otherwise would have been inexplicable. I mean, what in the world were we doing by attacking our neighbors? Well, this is why I attack my neighbors, because they're untrustworthy, or they want my land, or they want my women, or they want my money, or whatever. And we can't have that, so I needed to kill them. Right.
You make up a story. And of course, if you look at politics in our country and lots of other countries, UK, Australia, and so on, you see that the politics are primarily various tribes attacking each other and trying to kill each other.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing.
And it's a little bit funny. It's like, you know what? It doesn't really mean anything. It's just what we do when we're feeling threatened. And we're all feeling threatened, not just this COVID virus, but also, most of us have heard enough about climate change that we're pretty clear things are going very badly. And we're scared.
Well, let me bring us back. So thank you for that. And thank you for taking me and my listeners along for that ride. It's been beautiful to this point. I want to back up to a place that you seemingly just tucked in underneath the rug. And I'm listening for places to sort of get off the road and back up and like, oh yeah, well, I'll take them down there. And then like 10 or 12 different spaces showed up. So the one I'm going to pick to go down here, the side road, was this conversation you had with a bishop in something to do with the United Nations and then in Marrakesh. Yeah. So like, you just threw that in as if some of us have had conversations with UN related bishops in Marrakesh. And it turns out, Peter, that not many of us have had that experience. So tell us a little bit more about what, how, and in the transition from your commitment to poverty reduction on your way to commitment to climate. It seems that getting that, climate was about humanity in that discussion is a pivotal space in your life. So maybe you can add some context to how that conversation even evolved to being so, and, where your life has truly launched in the last few years with respect to who you are in the world of climate change.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I've been telling this story lately, and it just got clear to me a few weeks ago. So with regards to climate, I was an undergraduate at MIT in physics. I was studying astrophysics and in the mid-'70s. And back in around 73, 75, there was talk about global warming. And it was sort of simple because we knew we were pouring CO2 into the air, and the CO2 doesn't go anywhere. It just stays there. And so we're getting more and more CO2 in the air. And it was known back in 1870 that eventually the planet would get too hot for people, that if we would keep burning coal. No one imagined we would stop burning coal. And so eventually the planet would be too hot for people.
And this is as a function of the CO2 that we're emitting into the air directly? Is that what you're saying? And that leads to a blanket heat, or help me understand?
Yeah. Have you ever been in a greenhouse?
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
And so you have a pane of glass above you, and it traps the heat radiation inside the greenhouse and keeps the greenhouse warm. If you put in a second layer of glass, the greenhouse would get warmer, right? Because it would block more of the heat from escaping and still let the sunlight in to heat it up.
And I suspect that again, excuse my ignorance, but I suspect that that's the greenhouse effect that people are talking about right there. That's it.
I see. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
The more CO2 we pour into the air, the more panes of glass to warm up our greenhouse.
Okay, I'm with you. Keep going. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah, and there's nowhere for that CO2 to go. I mean, it's just in the air, and so it was very clear to me as an undergraduate, as a 20-year-old, that in another 25 years, the chemical engineers would have a very interesting job taking that CO2 out of the air. This was the same time, just a little after the Environmental Protection Agency was formed, and chemical engineers were learning how to remove pollutants from the ground.
Right.
And it was challenging and exciting, and for them. For me as a physicist, I was glad it was them and not me.
You're right. I think I was a chemical engineer for about 1/4 in 1977. So and then went to environmental engineering actually, and was really, as it turns out, at least staring down the barrel of that as a possible career. But of course I didn't go in that direction, but I digress. So please continue.
Well, no, you're on exactly the same boat. A lot of us said, tell me if this is not, as you think about it, tell me if this was not something that went through the back of your mind, the way back of your mind, is I don't want to be responsible for that. I'm going to do astrophysics instead.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Yeah, there was something like, that's a hard job. I'm not sure I want to be responsible for that, and down and dirty, and how are we going to do it? Yeah, I think it was a challenge that somehow wasn't enrolling enough to have me pursue it. That's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, more interestingly is I assert that we didn't want to risk failing on that.
Interesting.
Right? Because as 20-year-olds, we don't have a lot of confidence in our ability, and we didn't want humanity depending on us. I'm speaking for myself, but
I get it. It's beautiful. I got it. Yes.
And so fast forward, and tell me if this doesn't answer your question, because I've now forgotten your question, but this.
It was about to tell us how you got to the United Nations Bishop Marrakesh and that turn.
Right. Yeah. Okay, good. So the step before Marrakech was I'm at MIT. So I go back to MIT, my alma mater. This is in 2013 or something.
Okay.
Or 2014. And I'm going to switch the time around just to tell the story better. So I'm at MIT and I do a seminar on climate restoration, proposing that our goal on climate is to get CO2 back to proven safe levels that humans have survived, which is below 300 parts per million. It doesn't matter what that means. It just means that it's measurable, and you know when you get there and you know when you're not. For your listeners, and for me, I can tell you more about it, but I don't want to bore you with those technical details.
Of course.
And everyone there agreed. So we had the top climate professors in the world from MIT and their graduate students and undergraduates. And they said, yes, that is the ideal goal as far as we can see, to get CO2 back below 300 by the year 2050. And then I asked, okay, good. Who wants to work with me on it? I had been at the UN a few months earlier and asked them if they liked the goal, and the top executives at the UN said, yes, we love the goal, and we need to get some scientific literature about it before we can talk about it publicly. So I'm at MIT. The MIT professors said, no, we agree with you, and we're not going to work with you to write a paper about restoring the climate. And I was really upset for a day. And then I realized that they didn't really have a choice, that in their culture, they couldn't do anything about it. Mm-hmm. And really, they were making the same choice that you and I made when we were 20 years old.
Right.
They were, essentially, they were saying, I don't want to risk humanity on my trying to solve this totally existential problem.
Mm-hmm. Peter, what is the carbon parts per million that we're living into right this very minute? Just so my listeners know, it's not it's over 300, under 300. Where are we at right now?
We're we're 50% above what it had been during the last 1,000 years. So we're at 415 right now.
And 415 is above the human.
It's way above.
Way above.
Yeah. And
way above.
So the last time there was this much CO2 was just after the dinosaurs.
All right. Well, let's get to what happened in Marrakesh then. How did this get to be that you decided this is something that Peter Fiekowsky is going to be, recognized, sought after, and in demand about?
Well, basically, it was some wine because, as a scientist, the whole culture of climate has been about science. And so, as a scientist, I was comfortable with it, but it wasn't going anywhere. So once he said it was about humanity, and I hadn't, 2 glasses of wine in my body, I thought, you're right. It is about humanity. The truth is very simply, no matter what happens, nature's going to be fine. That is, if you want nature to be healthy, get rid of the humans. That's obvious. Mm-hmm. If you want science to be fine, well, let's go head humanity over the cliff, because they're going to have a lot of exciting data as we're going down the waterfall. Mm-hmm. But if you're interested in humanity, now, let's get the CO2 back to safe levels.
Right. I see. Depending on what's important to you, whether it's the ongoing existence of the human race.
Yeah.
Or good scientific material as we head on off the cliff on the waterfalls, that we have we have an opportunity to make a decision as to which direction to go to from here.
Yeah. Once you notice the choices you're making, because what's really interesting is from a religious perspective, we talk about preserving God's nature, right? Because God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh and so on. Or you may have other creation stories in your religion. We typically honor nature as God's creation, and we're God's children in almost every religion. And so we're bound to take care of nature. And that's left us in a terrible position because that really calls for the extinction of humanity. Oops.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a serious intersection in time, if that's what we're looking at as sort of the next step. Yes?
Right. And so what we're working on right now is expanding the religious perspective that it's about the survival and flourishing of humanity and the nature that we grew up inside of.
Wow. All right. Well, I could go a lot of places from here too, Peter. And one of the things that I'm really touched about, and we have just a few more minutes, is Peter was the keynote speaker yesterday in the Conference for Global Transformation and just did an I can't tell you how many people have come up to me, Peter, and just told me how moved, like their whole life was moved as a result of you and your daughter doing this keynote yesterday. So thank you for being that man. Yeah, it was just gorgeous. It was fabulous. And one of the things that I think you didn't address there directly is, okay, so if all this is so, do you have any advice? Is there anything that we should be doing that we're not doing, or something we should stop doing that we are doing? Is there something here over and above just learning more? Do you wave your finger at us, or is it really like, is it already a done deal, or what's out here for me to do, like little old me here in West Los Angeles, to make a difference, if in fact we have any shot of saving the human race inside of this climate crisis and other crises, to say the least, actually.
Yeah. Well, as a physicist who studied it very carefully, it's very easy to solve in terms of doing. And so getting the carbon back out, it turns out that's an issue that nature had worked on for a couple billion years and came up with a couple really good solutions because our planet has had really high concentrations of CO2. And then nature had to figure out, how do I get that CO2 down so that life can flourish? Now, nature wasn't really thinking that, but what happened is those things spontaneously happened, life flourished, and then life figured out, let's keep the CO2 levels down so that we can flourish. But pardon my anthropomorphizing there. And
so, that's the same kind of thing of doing something and then explaining it afterwards, like you spoke to earlier.
That's beautiful. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so most CO2 on the planet is contained in limestone, like over 99%. And so that's the easiest way that nature found to get CO2 out of the air. And you'd get plankton, which would turn it into calcium carbonate, which would fall to the bottom of the ocean. And if you look at the white cliffs of Dover, you can see it. It's just a whole bunch of sea life that fell to the bottom, turned into white chalk, but in the process reduced the CO2 level in the atmosphere to the levels that work really well for life. And it's complicated, but all we care about is that 300 parts per million, between 200 and 300 is the range that humans are fine with.
Would we notice? Do you suspect that we would notice in our everyday, breathing and walking through the world and just existing in the world if that parts per million was down between 2 and 300?
No, because it's a tiny amount. Again, ppm is parts per million, and so what you would notice is the weather would get normal again.
I see. Yeah.
Because it's primarily the temperature that it affects. Now, if you're in a greenhouse, you'll notice the difference, because you'll notice that plants will grow a little bit differently with more CO2, because plants breathe in the CO2 in order to make their make their energy along with sunlight. And so it makes, but we wouldn't notice that.
Okay.
But going back to your earlier question, so we can make synthetic limestone and then sell it, because most of the rock used in our roads and our buildings actually is limestone. And rather than mining it out of quarries or quarrying it, we can make it synthetically the same way an oyster makes an oyster shell.
Wow.
Right. It's not rocket science. It's just chemistry.
Wow.
And so I've been helping out a company here in Silicon Valley that's commercializing that process.
Wow.
And then we're working to get enthusiastic support so that governments will encourage the rapid adoption of using synthetic limestone over quarried limestone. It turns out the price is pretty much the same, which is amazing. So there's lots of ifs, ands, or buts depending on availability of materials and energy, but all that evolves over time. Technology always gets better.
Wow.
But
just amazing. So what I'm really hearing here, and I don't know if you realize the impact that you make when you speak to this topic. And, as sort of a closing or a tapering off of this version of our conversation, what I'm really noticing that is so inspiring here, Peter, I don't know, for me, it's even more inspiring than anything you said yesterday at the keynote there's just something about, wow, a solution. Wow, physicist and heartfelt father and United Nations speaker and man interested in creating a future that he can be proud of to give to his children has a solution to this threat to all of humanity, which of course wouldn't be a very proud gift to our children. And I am so moved about the simplicity comes out of your thinking and then your speech of what it would take to make a huge difference in this particular threat that humanity and all of life is facing at this point.
Let me just summarize it, because I know we need to wrap up, is that what people can do is create a sense of being what I call I am humanity. If I can put on a Giants cap because I live in San Francisco and I cheer for the Giants some of the time. And, I have a physicist hat on a lot of the time. So we can create an I am humanity hat that we wear from time to time, in which we look to see that we're committed to leaving a healthy planet for our children. Because all that's missing to get the climate back to the way it was is wanting to do it.
Right.
We've never said we want to do it before.
Right.
And so that you and your listeners can just promote that way of being.
Right.
Hopefully.
I am humanity. I am responsible. I am us. I am the future. I am the one creating this world for my children.
Yeah. And I am accountable for the survival and flourishing of humanity.
Beautiful.
If you tell your friends that, the job is done. Because your friends will hold you to that. They will not forget. They'll say, Fred, how's it going with the survival and flourishing of humanity?
Yeah. Well, I got pretty close after all. I'm walking on the edge here. The name of this particular podcast, of course, is Welcome to Humanity. And that's my number one. That's my brand name. And I feel very fortunate to be walking around with that brand name. And, really in some ways, Peter, if we were to tell our listeners, we sort of developed each other's brands together in a workshop that we were in over about a 7-minute share that we had with each other. And that's a beautiful story. And there's something like, if I declare myself to be human, I get to make a difference I get to make a difference, and I get to be accountable, responsible, and a contribution to that who I am, so that I can leave the planet, so that I can leave my children with something I can be proud of.
Well, what's really, that's really great. The really cool thing is our DNA has designed us to take great pleasure in actually doing that.
Exactly.
And so,
it works. So that's a measurement tool. It's like the pleasure.
Yeah. If you're really enjoying yourself, you're probably making a good difference for humanity.
Isn't that just great? All right. Well, Peter Fiekowsky has been my guest. It's just been awesome. A terrific conversation, Peter. Again, congratulations on the keynote yesterday, and congratulations and thank you for who you are for our, all of life, actually. And your coolness and your calmness and your steadiness and your intelligence and your contribution and your dedication, your commitment, and it goes on and on. Your love of people, your passion, your humor. It's all just super cool to know you, Peter, and to have been evolving at least next to you over these last 5 years has been an honor. And it is beyond an honor to have interviewed you today. So thank you for being here for my listeners. And, I'll catch you on the flip side, which shouldn't be too very long from now.
Great. Well, thank you, Fred. Thank you.
Anything else you want to say? Yeah. Anything else you want to say just to close?
Oh, let's see. Really, thank you. And in terms of humanity, remember that we're designed to be very tribal. And once you notice that, and you know that is part of our design, then you can set it aside anytime it attacks. I was talking to Brian today. He said, "Oh yeah, that's why we attack our partners.
Yeah, right.
If we get threatened, and we're designed to attack when we're threatened our neighbors, and that includes our romantic partners."
That's really, really interesting. Really interesting. Peter, let's have another talk soon. I would be glad to have, podcast number 2 and maybe number 2 and 3, or maybe a run of podcasts as I have offered, as we have talked about in the past, working together. I really love talking to you, and I'm sure my listeners loved hearing us speak and especially hearing what you're up to. So thanks for being here again, and we'll see you again on the next ride. Thank you for being exactly who you are and for showing up today. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Okay.
You're welcome. All right.
Bye.
I just want to thank you so much for tuning in today to my conversation with Peter Fiekowsky. I mean, I just love this guy. I met him about 7 years ago, and now he's like one of the biggest deals in the entire world in the way of climate change. And he really is making a difference. How about what he said about limestone, that it's that simple to make a huge difference on a global scale. And he, of course, is in the process of making that happen. He's just such a down-to-earth guy. And again, so steady and so fun to talk to and such a good listener. Really seems, to be a really spectacular person. But I'm telling you, he's so humble in his presentation. And it's really, really lovely to have had the opportunity to speak with him a day after he, delivered that keynote at the Conference for Global Transformation. So maybe when you were listening to this, you thought, wow, that is really inspirational. And I have some friends who would love to listen. So feel free to reach out to them right now and invite them to listen and to subscribe to the Welcome to Humanity podcast. Of course, if you haven't subscribed yet, now's a really good time to hit that button on your podcast player. If you do that, I'll be able to get you the latest episodes right as they become available. Head on over to welcometohumanity.net/podcast. And they're waiting for you there. And we've done a number of them, and each and every one has been spectacular. But this one with Peter, well, maybe it takes the cake. So thank you for joining, guys. I really, really appreciate it. I look forward to the next episode with you. And it's been a deep pleasure. For now, it's Dr. Fred signing off. Welcome to Humanity.